The sun was slowly setting over Paris when we arrived at the restaurant Le Petit Chateau. It was a Friday evening, and the elegant establishment was shining brightly, its large windows revealing the warm bustle inside. My husband, Pierre, opened the car door for me with a nervous smile. I knew this dinner with his family was stressing him out, as it always does. "It's going to be fine, Amélie," he whispered as he helped me downstairs. I smoothed out my black dress, a little too simple perhaps for the occasion, and took a deep breath. Dinners with Pierre's family were always an ordeal for me, but I tried to keep smiling. We pushed open the restaurant's heavy wooden door, and immediately the delicious smell of French cuisine enveloped us. An impeccable maître d' greeted us with a professional smile. "Good evening, sir and madam. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, on behalf of Dubois," Pierre replied. "We're joining my family." The maître d' consulted his register and guided us to a large round table at the back of the room. Pierre's family was already there, his parents, sister and brother-in-law. They stood up as we approached, all smiles. "Pierre, my darling," exclaimed his mother, Hélène, embracing him. Then she turned to me, her smile freezing slightly. "Amélie, you look lovely." I sensed the falseness in his voice, but did my best to sound grateful. "Thank you, Hélène. You look elegant as always." We all sat down, and I noticed that the table was set with particular care. The silver cutlery gleamed under the subdued glow of the candelabras, and the fine china plates seemed almost too delicate to use. Pierre's father, François, spoke up. "So, how's work going, Pierre? I hear your business is having some difficulties." I felt Pierre stiffen beside me. His consulting business was indeed going through a difficult period, but he hated talking about it, especially to his father. "It's okay, Dad," he replied evasively. "We've got some promising new customers." I put my hand on his under the table, trying to convey my support. He gave me a grateful look. The conversation continued, revolving around the successes of Pierre's sister Marie and her husband Jean. Their law firm was thriving, and they'd just bought a house in the country. I could feel Hélène's disapproving gaze on me, as if she held me responsible for Pierre's difficulties. The waiter came to take our orders, and I chose the cheapest dish on the menu, aware of my mother-in-law's scrutinizing gaze. Pierre ordered a bottle of wine, no doubt hoping to lighten the mood. As we waited for our entrees, I noticed that the general atmosphere in the restaurant was warm and lively. Nearby tables were occupied by couples laughing, families chatting happily, friends toasting. Our table seemed to be the only island of tension in this ocean of conviviality. "And you, Amélie?" François asked, pulling me out of my thoughts. "Have you found work recently?" I felt my heart clench. Since our marriage, I hadn't worked officially, devoting my time to helping Pierre with his business and looking after our house. But of course, I couldn't tell them the truth about my past or what I was really doing. I'm still looking," I stammered. "The job market is tough right now." Hélène gave an exasperated little sigh. "My dear, perhaps you should consider training. There are always opportunities for those who are truly motivated." I felt anger welling up inside me, but I suppressed it. I knew that defending myself would only make things worse. Pierre squeezed my hand under the table. "Maman, Esselinoit plat," he said softly. "Amélie is doing her best." The waiter arrived with our entrées, offering a welcome distraction. I looked down at my plate of salad, suddenly disinclined to eat. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken words and silent judgments. As we ate, I discreetly observed the other diners. An elderly couple at the next table were sharing a dessert, their eyes shining with love after what seemed like decades together. I wondered if Pierre and I would ever be like them, or if his family's disapproval would eventually drive us apart. The main course arrived, and the conversation resumed, turning to lighter topics like the latest French film craze or everyone's vacation plans. I tried to participate, to appear interested and cheerful, but I always felt this underlying tension, like a rope about to snap. Pierre was doing his best to include me in the conversation, asking me questions about my opinions, trying to highlight my knowledge. But every time I spoke, I could see Hélène exchanging glances with François, as if my every word confirmed their negative opinion of me. As the meal drew to a close and the waiter cleared our plates, I sensed that something was about to happen. Helene seemed increasingly agitated, her gaze going from Pierre to me, then to her husband. The atmosphere was electric, charged with a tension ready to explode. I glanced at my watch, hoping the evening would soon be over. But I knew that was just wishful thinking. Pierre's family loved long evenings, endless discussions over a digestif. I mentally prepared myself for at least another hour of this torment. The waiter returned with the dessert menu. As we consulted it, I noticed that Helene's hands were trembling slightly. She abruptly closed her menu, startling everyone at the table. "I think it's time we had a serious conversation," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I felt my stomach knot. Pierre put his hand on my knee under the table, as if to protect me from what was to come. But we both knew that this gesture was futile in the face of the coming storm. The silence that followed Helene's statement was deafening. All eyes were on her, waiting to hear what would happen next. My heart was beating so fast I was sure the whole restaurant could hear it. Pierre squeezed my hand under the table, but I could feel that he was just as tense as I was. Suddenly, Helene stood up, her chair scraping noisily across the floor. She took a deep breath, and I knew at that moment that my life was about to change. "I can't keep silent any longer," she began, her voice trembling but determined. "That woman," she pointed at me, "that Amélie, is not worthy of our family." A murmur of shock ran through the neighboring tables. I felt the blood leave my face, but I was unable to move or speak. "Mom, what are you doing?" whispered Pierre, horrified. But Helene was on a roll, and nothing seemed to be able to stop her. "She can't even fry an egg, for heaven's sake. I visited their apartment, and it's a disaster. She can't do anything with her 10 fingers. I wanted to protest, to say that it wasn't true, that I knew how to cook, that our apartment was perfectly maintained. But the words stuck in my throat. "And that's not all," Helene continued, her voice rising a notch. "She's a leech, a profiteer who lives off our Pierre. She doesn't work, she doesn't contribute anything, and meanwhile, my son is exhausted trying to keep his business afloat." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them flow. I didn't want to give Helene the satisfaction. "She doesn't deserve to be in our family," Helene concluded, slapping the table with her hand. "She doesn't belong in our world, and it's time we made that clear." A stony silence fell over the restaurant. Even the other customers had stopped their conversations to observe our family drama being played out in public. I looked around the table, seeking support, a sympathetic glance. François had lowered his eyes, visibly uncomfortable but not contradicting his wife. Marie and Jean exchanged embarrassed glances, unsure of how to react. And Pierre, my Pierre, usually so strong, seemed to have turned into a statue of salt. He stared at his mother, mouth agape, unable to utter a word in my defense. It was then that I realized just how alone I was. Alone in the face of this family who had never really accepted me, alone in the face of these unjust accusations, alone even in the face of my husband who remained paralyzed by shock. I felt a wave of nausea rise up inside me. Shame, humiliation, anger, all mixed together in my mind, creating a whirlwind of emotions so intense I could hardly breathe. I began, but my voice broke. What could I say? How could I defend myself against such cruel and public accusations? The stares of the other customers weighed on me. I heard whispers, saw fingers pointed in our direction. Our family drama had become a public spectacle, and I was the main character, the intruder, the villain of the story in the eyes of all these strangers. I thought of getting up and leaving, of fleeing this unbearable situation. But my legs wouldn't move. I was pinned down, forced to endure this humiliation to the end. "Helene," François finally said, breaking the silence. "Perhaps we should discuss this in private." But Helene wasn't finished. "No, François. I'm tired of pretending. It's time everyone knew the truth about this. She was obviously looking for the cruelest possible word to describe me. I closed my eyes, waiting for the final blow. That's when a loud, authoritative voice rang through the restaurant. I'm going to have to ask you to calm down." I opened my eyes to see the restaurant owner approaching our table. His face was stern, but his eyes seemed to stare at me with a strange intensity. Monsieur, this is a family matter, Helene began, but the owner cut her off with a gesture. Madam, you're disturbing my other customers. If you can't behave in a civilized manner, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the establishment. Helene seemed to deflate like a balloon. She sat back down, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. The owner then turned to me, and I thought I saw a flash of recognition in his eyes. Madam, he said softly, may I speak to you for a moment in private? I hesitated, glancing at Pierre, who seemed to be coming out of his torpor at last. He nodded, silently encouraging me to follow the owner. On shaky legs, I stood up and followed the man to a quiet corner of the restaurant. My mind was whirling. What did he want from me? Was he going to ask me to leave to avoid any more scenes? The owner turned to me, and suddenly his face lit up with a broad smile. I can't believe it's really you, he said, his voice full of excitement. I blinked, confused. Pardon? You're Amélie Lefevre, aren't you? Chef Amélie Lefevre? My heart missed a beat. How did he know my maiden name? How did he know I'd been a chef? Yes, it was me, I stammered. But how? The owner laughed softly. How do I know that? Madam, it's thanks to you that this restaurant exists. I must have looked completely lost, because he was quick to explain. Years ago, I watched your cooking show on local television. Your passion, your creativity. It inspired me to open my own restaurant. You were my idol. I was speechless, unable to formulate a coherent response. My past, the past I had so carefully hidden from Pierre's family, had just resurfaced in the most unexpected way. The landlord continued, not seeming to notice my confusion. When I heard you'd left television, I was devastated. But you had already given me the motivation I needed. And now you're here, in my restaurant. I glanced at our table. Pierre and his family were watching us, looking puzzled and confused. Monsieur, I said softly, I'm flattered, really. But I've left that life behind. I'm not that person anymore. The owner looked at me with an expression of surprise and disappointment. But why? You had such talent, such passion. I felt tears welling up in my eyes again, but this time they were tears of regret and nostalgia. It's a long story, I whispered. He nodded, understanding. I understand. But know that you'll always be welcome here. And if you ever decide to take up cooking again. He left his sentence hanging, leaving me to imagine the possibilities. For the first time all evening, I felt a glimmer of hope. Thank you, I said sincerely. Really, thank you. As I returned to our table, I felt the weight of the stares on me. But this time, they were no longer looks of judgment or pity. They were looks of curiosity, maybe even admiration. And for the first time since I'd married Pierre, I felt ready to face his family, to tell them the truth about who I really was. When I returned to our table, all eyes were on me. The atmosphere had changed completely. Helene's anger seemed to have dissipated, replaced by a curiosity mingled with confusion. Pierre looked at me with wide eyes, as if seeing me for the first time. Amélie, François began, breaking the silence, what's going on? Why did the owner want to talk to you? I took a deep breath, about to answer, when the owner reappeared beside me. His face beamed with excitement. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced enthusiastically, I have the immense honor of informing you that you are in the presence of a true culinary legend. I felt my cheeks flush. This wasn't exactly how I'd planned to reveal my past. Your Amélie, he continued, ignoring my embarrassment, is none other than the famous chef Amélie Lefevre. A murmur of surprise ran through the table. Marie let out a small cry of surprise, while Jean almost choked on his wine. Chef, stammered Helene, her face shifting from confusion to disbelief. The owner, carried away by his enthusiasm, continued, years ago, Amélie hosted a cooking show on local television. It was watching her that inspired me to open this restaurant. She was innovative, passionate, and her talent was undeniable. I looked down, unsure how to react to this praise. Pierre took my hand under the table, squeezing it gently in a show of support. But that's not all, the owner continued. Amélie was known for her ability to transform the simplest dishes into veritable works of culinary art. Her show on the different ways to prepare an egg became a cult in gastronomic circles. At these words, Helene looked like she was choking on her own saliva. I remembered her cruel words from just a few minutes ago, about how I didn't even know how to fry an egg. "Sir," I said softly, trying to calm the owner's enthusiasm, "that was a long time ago. I'm not that person anymore." But the owner didn't seem to hear me. "Oh, but talent never really disappears, does it? Madame Lefevre, or should I say, Madame Dubois now, you'd be doing us a huge honor if you'd agree to prepare a special dish tonight. To show your family and our customers what you're capable of." I felt panic rising inside me. It had been years since I'd cooked professionally, and the idea of doing it now, in front of Pierre's family and a full restaurant, terrified me. I don't know if I began, but Pierre cut me off. "Amélie," he said softly, "why didn't you ever tell me about any of this?" I looked at my husband, seeing in his eyes a mixture of surprise, confusion and, was it pride? I was afraid, I confessed. Afraid you'd think I'd given up my career because of you. Afraid that your family would judge me even more harshly if they knew I'd had success and given it up. Helene, who had remained silent until now, spoke up in a trembling voice. But why did you keep it a secret? Why didn't you tell us?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. When I met Pierre, I was at a turning point in my career. My show had just been cancelled, and I was wondering whether I should go on with it. Then I learned that Pierre's family was going through financial difficulties. I decided to put my career on hold to help out, quietly working as a culinary consultant for various restaurants. Pierre's eyes widened at this revelation. I knew he was wondering how I could have kept it a secret for so long. "But why didn't you tell us?" insisted Francois. "Because." I hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because I wanted to be accepted for who I was, not for who I had been. I wanted you to love me as Amélie, Pierre's wife, not as a former local celebrity." A heavy silence fell over the table. Everyone seemed to be absorbing this new information, re-evaluating everything they thought they knew about me. It was then that the owner, who had remained silent during my explanation, spoke up again. "Mrs. Dubois, I understand your reluctance. But let me make you a proposal. Why not prepare a simple fried egg? To show your family what you can do, and maybe, to remind yourself of the passion you once had." I hesitated. The idea was tempting, but frightening. It had been so long since I'd cooked for an audience. "Come on, Amélie," Pierre encouraged me, squeezing my hand. "Show them who you really are." I looked around the table. The faces that a few minutes before had expressed judgment and disapproval now showed curiosity and anticipation. "Okay," I finally said. "I'll do it." The owner clapped enthusiastically. "Wonderful. I'll take you to the kitchen. We have the finest ingredients, and I'm sure our chefs will be delighted to witness a demonstration by the legendary Amélie Lefevre." As I stood up to follow the owner, I felt a hand hold me back. It was Helene. "Amélie," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, I'm sorry for everything I said. I hope you can forgive me." I nodded, too moved to speak. Then, gathering my courage, I followed the owner to the kitchen. As I entered the gleaming kitchen, I was assailed by a wave of memories. The smell of spices, the sound of pots and pans, the warmth of stoves. It was all so familiar and yet so foreign. The chefs present turned to me, their faces expressing a mixture of curiosity and respect. The owner introduced me, and I saw their eyes light up with recognition. "Well," I said, taking a deep breath. "Let's start with a perfect fried egg." I asked for a fresh egg, a non-stick frying pan, some olive oil and salt. My hands trembled slightly as I cracked the egg, but as soon as I heard the crackle of the oil, something inside me awoke. It was as if the years had faded away. My movements became fluid, confident. I watched the cooking carefully, adjusting the heat precisely. In just a few minutes, I'd created a perfect fried egg, the white crisp around the edges but soft next to the yolk, and the yolk itself, golden and runny just right. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Then, suddenly, applause erupted. The chefs, the owner, even a few waiters who had snuck in to observe, all applauded enthusiastically. It's beautiful," whispered the head chef. "A true work of art." The owner, his eyes shining, looked at me admiringly. "Madame Dubois, you've lost none of your talent. Would you like to present it to your family yourself?" I nodded, suddenly eager to show Pierre and his family what I could do. Carrying the plate with pride, I returned to the restaurant. All eyes turned to me as I approached our table. I set the plate down in the center of the table, and saw everyone's eyes widen at the perfection of this seemingly simple fried egg. "Amélie," Pierre murmured, his voice full of admiration, "it's incredible." Hélène, tears in her eyes, reached out to me. "My dear, I'm so sorry. I've been so unfair to you. Can you forgive me?" I took her hand in mine, feeling that something had changed, that a new page was opening in our relationship. And as the whole family admired my fried egg, a symbol of my rediscovered past and my rediscovered talent, I realized that this moment marked not only a reconciliation, but also the beginning of a new chapter in my life. As my in-laws contemplated the fried egg I'd just prepared, I felt it was time to reveal the whole truth about my past. The atmosphere had changed, the tension had dissipated, replaced by a palpable curiosity. I took a deep breath and began my story. 10 years ago, I said softly, I was known as Amélie Lefevre, a promising young chef with her own cooking show on the local channel. I saw Hélène's eyes widen in surprise. François leaned forward, intrigued. Marie and Jean exchanged astonished glances. Pierre, my dear Pierre, shook my hand in encouragement. My show, Les Délices d'Amélie, had started modestly, I continued. At first, it was just a small weekly segment on the local TV news. But it didn't take long for the public to respond positively. People appreciated my simple, creative approach to traditional French cuisine. I paused, recalling those exciting days when anything seemed possible. Within months, the network offered me my own primetime show. It was a dream come true. I spent my days creating new recipes, exploring local markets in search of unique ingredients, meeting passionate producers. But Amélie, Hélène interjected, how come we've never heard of this show? I smiled sadly. The show was only broadcast on our local channel, Hélène. It was successful in our region, but never reached a national audience. However, for me, it was a whole world. I continued my story, describing the long hours of filming, the excitement of creating new recipes every week, the joy of receiving letters from viewers telling how my recipes had brightened their family dinners. The egg episode, I said, glancing at the plate in the center of the table, became particularly popular. I showed 50 different ways to prepare an egg, from the simplest to the most elaborate. The episode even won a local award for Best Cooking Show. I saw a gleam of pride in Pierre's eyes. He knew I loved to cook, but he'd never realized how important it had been to me. For 2 years, my life was a whirlwind of activity, I continued. Between film shoots, public appearances, and running my little restaurant, I hardly slept at all. But I was happy, passionate about what I was doing. I took a sip of water, preparing to tackle the most difficult part of my story. Then, one day, everything turned upside down, I said softly. The channel was bought by a major media group. The new owners wanted to concentrate on more commercial programs. They decided not to renew my contract. I saw the compassion in François' eyes. Even Hélène seemed touched by my story. I was devastated, I admitted. I had put my heart and soul into this show. My little restaurant depended largely on the publicity generated by the show. Without it, customers were scarce. I squeezed Pierre's hand, drawing comfort from his presence. That's when I met Pierre, I said with a smile. He had come to dine in my nearly empty restaurant one evening. We talked all night, and he listened to me talk about my broken dreams. Pierre spoke for the first time. I remember that evening, he said softly. I was impressed by your passion, your resilience despite the odds. I nodded, grateful. Pierre gave me the strength to carry on. But soon after we met, I learned that his family was going through financial difficulties. Pierre's business was in trouble, and I knew he needed all his time and energy to save it. I looked each family member in the eye. It was then that I made a difficult decision. I decided to put my career as a chef on hold. I closed my restaurant and started working quietly as a culinary consultant for other establishments. But why didn't you tell us? Asked Marie, puzzled. I sighed. At first it was out of pride, I suppose. I didn't want you to think I'd failed in my career. Then, as I became more integrated into your family, I realized that you had a certain image of what a good wife should be. I was afraid that if you knew about my past, you'd judge me even more harshly for giving up my career. Helene lowered her eyes, visibly embarrassed by her past judgments. But that wasn't all, I continued. By working as a consultant, I made a good living. It allowed me to help Pierre and his family without you knowing. I didn't want you to think I was a leech, as you said earlier, Helene. Helene blushed intensely at these words. Amélie, I'm so sorry, she murmured. I smiled gently at her. I understand, Helene. You only knew part of the story. I turned to Pierre. I know I should have told you the truth sooner. I was afraid you'd think I'd sacrificed my career for you, that you'd feel guilty. But the truth is, you gave me a new reason to live when I'd lost mine. Pierre had tears in his eyes. Amélie, he said softly, you didn't have to carry this burden alone. I wish you'd trusted me. I nodded. I know. I realize now that I made a mistake keeping it all a secret. But somehow, helping your family behind the scenes gave me a new meaning to my life. It made me feel useful again, even if it wasn't in the way I'd always dreamed. Francois then spoke up. Amélie, we owe you an apology. We misjudged you, without really getting to know you. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Thank you, Francois. It means a lot to me. The restaurant owner, who had remained in the background during my tale, approached our table. Madame Dubois, he said enthusiastically, after tasting your fried egg, I'm even more convinced that your talent is a gift that shouldn't remain hidden. How would you like to come and give cooking lessons in our restaurant? We could organize weekly workshops. I looked at him, surprised by this unexpected proposal. It was an opportunity to reconnect with my passion, to share my love of cooking once again. I turned to Pierre, seeking his approval. He smiled broadly. That's an excellent idea, he says. You have so much to offer, Amélie. Helene then intervened. And maybe you could teach me how to make such a perfect fried egg, she asked shyly. I laughed, feeling a wave of relief and joy wash over me. Of course, Helene. It would be a pleasure. As we continued to discuss the possibilities before me, I realized that this evening that had started so badly was turning into a new beginning. A start where I could finally be myself, with all my past and all my passions, in front of my new family. And as we raised our glasses to toast this new chapter in our lives, I felt that, for the first time in a long time, I really belonged. I was Amélie Dubois, formerly known as Amélie Lefevre, and I was ready to embrace my passion for cooking once again, with the support of my family. The atmosphere at our table had changed completely. The initial shock of my revelations had given way to palpable curiosity and a sincere desire to understand my background. I could feel the gazes of Pierre's family oscillating between me and the perfectly fried egg that sat in the center of the table, as if they were trying to reconcile their image of me with this new reality. Francois was the first to break the silence. Amélie, he began, his voice full of an emotion I'd never heard from him before, I think we all owe you an apology. We judged you without really knowing you. Helene, her eyes shining with restrained tears, nodded vigorously. Yes, my dear. I've been particularly hard on you, and I blame myself terribly. Can you forgive us? I felt my throat tighten with emotion. Of course, I murmured. I understand that my silence may have been interpreted in a negative way. I should have been more open from the start. Marie, who had remained silent until now, then spoke up. But Amélie, how could you keep all this a secret for so long? It must have been so hard for you. I nodded, grateful for his compassion. It was, I admitted. There were times when I almost told you everything. But the more time passed, the harder it became to find the right moment. Pierre, who had been listening attentively up to this point, turned to me, a gleam of understanding in his eyes. That's why you always insisted on cooking at our family dinners, isn't it? It was your way of sharing a part of yourself with us, without revealing everything. I smiled tenderly at him. Exactly. Cooking has always been my way of expressing myself, of showing my love. Even if I couldn't tell you who I really was, I could at least feed you with all my heart. Francois leaned forward, elbows on the table. But Amélie, what I don't understand is why you continued to work in secret as a culinary consultant. You could have told us, we would have understood. I took a deep breath, knowing this part of the story would be tricky to explain. At first, it was out of necessity. When I heard that Pierre's company was going through difficulties, I wanted to help. But I knew that Pierre was a proud man who wanted to make it on his own. So I started working discreetly, using my contacts in the culinary world to earn money I could inject into our household without arousing suspicion. I saw Pierre's eyes widen in surprise. Amélie, he murmured, you mean all this time? I nodded. Yes, my love. The little extras we had, the vacations we could afford despite the company's difficulties. It all came from my job as a consultant. Hélène brought a hand to her mouth, visibly shocked. But then, when I accused you of being a leech, she flinched at the word. You were actually the one financially supporting our family. I didn't want you to know, I explained gently. I didn't want Pierre to feel diminished, or for you to think I was trying to buy my way into the family. I just wanted to help, in my own way. Jean, who had remained silent until now, intervened. That's admirable, Amélie. But it must have been an enormous burden to bear alone. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. It was, I admitted. There were times when I almost gave up, when the pressure of maintaining this double life became unbearable. But every time I saw Pierre's smile, every time I felt I'd been able to lighten this family's burden a little, it was worth it. Pierre squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with emotion. I'm sorry I didn't notice, he said softly. I should have seen how much you were sacrificing for us. I shook my head. No, my love. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a choice. A choice I would make again without hesitation. Francois cleared his throat, visibly moved. Amélie, we can never thank you enough for everything you've done. You have supported this family behind the scenes, never asking for anything in return. We have been blind and unfair to you. Hélène nodded vigorously. Yes, my dear. I'm ashamed of the way I treated you. Can you forgive me? I reached out to her, gently touching her arm. Of course, Hélène. We've all made mistakes. The important thing is that we can move forward, together. Marie, her eyes shining, raised her glass. I propose a toast, she said. To Amélie, the strongest and most generous woman I know. Welcome to the family, for real this time. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt my heart swell with emotion. For the first time since I'd married Pierre, I felt truly accepted, truly understood. The owner of the restaurant, who had discreetly slipped away during our conversation, returned just then. Forgive me for interrupting, he said with a warm smile, but I have a proposition to make to Madame Dubois, if you'll allow me. All eyes turned to him, curious. Amélie, he continued, after tasting your fried egg and hearing your story, I'm convinced that your talent shouldn't remain hidden. How would you like to teach cooking classes here in my restaurant? We could organize weekly workshops, where you could share your passion and expertise with our customers. I stood speechless, surprised by this unexpected proposal. It was an opportunity to reconnect with my passion, to share my love of cooking once again. Pierre squeezed my hand, encouraging me with his eyes. That's an excellent idea, he said enthusiastically. What do you think, Amélie? I looked around the table, seeing the encouragement in the eyes of every member of the family. Even Hélène seemed excited by the prospect. I don't know what to say, I stammered. It's a wonderful opportunity, but what, my darling? Asked Pierre softly. I took a deep breath. I'm afraid, I admitted. Afraid to put myself back in the spotlight, afraid I'm not up to it after all these years. Francois leaned forward. Amélie, after everything you've been through, after everything you've done for this family, you've proven that you're capable of overcoming any obstacle. You're stronger than you think. Hélène nodded. And we'll be there to support you this time. All of us. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, overwhelmed by their unexpected support. Thank you, I murmured. That means a lot to me. Turning to the restaurant owner, I made my decision. "I accept your offer," I said with a smile. "I would be honored to teach cooking classes here." The owner claps happily. "Wonderful. We'll start next week. I'm sure your classes will be a great success." As we continued to discuss the details of this new adventure, I realized that this evening, which had started so disastrously, had turned into a new beginning. A start where I could finally be myself, with all my past and all my passions, supported by my family. And as we raised our glasses to toast this new chapter in our lives, I felt that, for the first time in a long time, I really belonged. I was Amélie Dubois, formerly known as Amélie Lefevre, and I was ready to embrace my passion for cooking once again, with the unconditional support of my family. The owner of the restaurant, visibly excited by the idea of having me as a guest chef for cooking classes, led me into the kitchen. Excitement was palpable in the air, not only on my part, but also on that of my entire family, who were following closely behind us. As I stepped through the swing doors into the kitchen, I was immediately overwhelmed by a wave of memories. The smell of spices, the sound of pots and pans, the heat of the stove. It was all so familiar, and at the same time, it had been so long since I'd set foot in a professional kitchen. "Ladies and gentlemen," the owner proudly announced to his kitchen team, "I have the honor of introducing Amélie Dubois, formerly known as Amélie Lefevre, a locally renowned chef who will be giving us a demonstration tonight." The chefs and commis de cuisine turned to me, their faces expressing a mixture of curiosity and respect. I felt a flush of nervousness rise in me, but took a deep breath to calm myself. "Good evening, everyone," I said with a shy smile. "I'm delighted to be with you tonight." The chef stepped forward, extending his hand to me. "It's an honor, Madame Dubois. I heard about your show years ago. What would you like to prepare for us tonight?" I looked around, taking note of the available ingredients. Then an idea came to me. "How about a modern reinterpretation of the fried egg?" I suggested. "Something that shows that even the simplest dish can become extraordinary with a little creativity." The chef smiled broadly. "That's an excellent idea. We have everything you could possibly need. The kitchen is all yours." With a grateful nod, I set to work. I asked for fresh eggs, country bread, fresh herbs, goat's cheese and a few other ingredients. My hands were a little shaky at first, but as soon as I started cooking, all my doubts vanished. I started by preparing a fresh herb puree with olive oil, garlic and lemon. Meanwhile, I toasted slices of farmhouse bread until golden and crisp. Next, I gently melted the goat's cheese in a small saucepan with a little cream, adding a pinch of freshly ground black pepper. Then it was time to prepare the eggs. I took out a non-stick frying pan and heated it over medium heat. With precision, I cracked the eggs into the pan, making sure that the whites remained round. As the eggs cooked, I explained each step to the kitchen crew, who watched me intently. "The key to a perfect fried egg," I said, "is patience. You have to let the white cook slowly so that it's crispy around the edges but still soft near the yolk." I watched the cooking carefully, adjusting the heat precisely. When the eggs were ready, I carefully removed them from the pan. To dress, I began by spreading a thin layer of herb puree on the slices of toast. Then I placed the fried eggs on the bread, ensuring that the yolks remained intact. I then gently poured the melted goat's cheese over the eggs, creating elegant patterns. Finally, I sprinkled the dish with a few freshly chopped herbs and a pinch of fleur de sel. The result was magnificent, a fried egg elevated to a culinary work of art. The white was perfectly cooked, crispy around the edges and soft in the center, while the bright, golden yolk promised to flow with the first bite. The color contrast between the bright yellow of the egg, the green of the herb puree and the creamy white of the goat's cheese was striking. An admiring silence fell over the kitchen. Then, suddenly, applause broke out. Chefs, clerks, the owner, and my family, who had been watching the whole scene, all applauded enthusiastically. It's magnificent," whispered the head chef. "A true work of culinary art." Hélène, who had snuck into the kitchen to observe, had tears in her eyes. "Amélie," she said softly, "I've never seen anything like it. It's incredible." Pierre approached me, hugging me from behind. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered in my ear. The owner, his eyes shining with excitement, turned to me. Madame Dubois, it's decided. We absolutely must organize cooking classes with you. Our customers will love it. I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. It was as if all those years of silence and doubt had suddenly vanished. I was back in my element, doing what I loved most in the world. Thank you, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. Thank you all for giving me this chance. Francois stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. No, Amélie. It's we who should be thanking you. For your patience, your kindness, and now, for showing us your true talent. Marie added enthusiastically, you absolutely must teach me how to do that. I've never seen a fried egg so beautiful and appetizing. Jean nodded vigorously. Yes, and so am I. I feel like our Sunday mornings are going to take on a whole new dimension. We all laughed, the atmosphere light and cheerful, so different from the tension at the start of dinner. The chef approached me respectfully. Madame Dubois, it would be an honor for us to learn from you. Your technique and creativity are remarkable. I smiled, touched by this compliment from a professional. Thank you so much. I look forward to working with all of you. The owner, as enthusiastic as ever, began planning aloud. We could organize weekly classes, maybe on Saturday mornings, and maybe even weekday evening classes for those who work. As he continued to draw up plans, I looked around. The kitchen was buzzing with excitement, my family was beaming with pride, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at home. Pierre hugged me. You see, he whispered, I told you everything would be all right. You're extraordinary, Amélie. I rested my head on his shoulder, overwhelmed with gratitude. This evening, which had started out so disastrously, had turned into an unexpected new beginning. I had regained my passion, earned the respect of my in-laws, and was about to begin an exciting new chapter in my life. As we left the kitchen, the reinvented fried egg proudly displayed for all the restaurant's customers to admire, I realized that sometimes it takes an egg breaking for a new life to hatch. And my new life, surrounded by the love and support of my family, promised to be as rich and tasty as the dish I'd just created. The days that followed that memorable evening at the restaurant were a whirlwind of emotions and activities. The revelation of my past and my culinary talents had completely changed the family dynamic, and I finally felt accepted and appreciated for who I really was. The next morning, as Pierre and I were having breakfast, the phone rang. It was Hélène, my mother-in-law, calling to apologize once again and to ask if I could give her private cooking lessons. I was touched by her request and gladly accepted. Amélie, she said, her voice full of emotion, I'd really like to learn to cook like you. I realize now how unfair I've been to you all these years. I'd like to make up for lost time, if you'll let me. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Of course, Hélène. It would be a pleasure to share my knowledge with you. How about starting this weekend? We agreed on a date, and I hung up the phone with a sense of lightness I hadn't felt in a long time. Pierre looked at me with a warm smile. See, he said softly, I told you my mother would come to like you. She just needed a little time, and a perfect fried egg. We laughed together, savoring this moment of rediscovered complicity. The following days were devoted to preparing my future cooking classes at the restaurant. The owner was enthusiastic and gave me carte blanche to draw up the program. I spent hours planning the menus, thinking about the techniques I wanted to teach, imagining how I could pass on my passion for cooking to my future students. Saturday arrived more quickly than I expected. Hélène came to the house, visibly nervous but determined. I had prepared the kitchen for our lesson, laying out all the necessary ingredients on the worktop. Hello, Hélène, I greeted her warmly. Ready for your first lesson? She nodded, a small smile on her lips. I'm a little anxious, she admitted. I've never been very good in the kitchen. I laid a reassuring hand on her arm. Don't worry. We'll start with the basics. And remember, cooking is all about passion and practice. We started with the recipe for the perfect fried egg. I explained each step in detail, showing Hélène how to control the temperature of the pan, how to break the egg gently so that the yolk remained intact, and how to know exactly when the egg was cooked to perfection. At first, Hélène was clumsy, breaking several eggs and letting the edges burn. But to my surprise, instead of getting upset or giving up as I'd previously imagined, she persisted with determination. "I want to make it," she said with a defiant gleam in her eye. "I want to be able to cook for my family like you do, Amelie." Her words moved me deeply. I realized that this cooking lesson was much more than a simple culinary apprenticeship. It was a way for us to get closer, to heal the wounds of the past. After several attempts, Helene finally succeeded in producing an almost perfect fried egg. Her face lit up with pride when she saw the result. "I did it," she exclaimed, beaming. "Amelie, thank you. I never thought I could do that." We continued the lesson, moving on to other simple but delicious recipes. By the end of the day, Helene had prepared a small feast: fried eggs, a fresh salad with homemade vinaigrette, and even a simple but elegant dessert. When Pierre came home from work, he was amazed to see his mother and me laughing together in the kitchen, surrounded by mouth-watering dishes. "What's going on here?" he asked, incredulous. Helene turned to him with a big smile. "Your wife is a wonderful teacher, Pierre. She taught me how to cook today." Pierre looked at us in turn, visibly moved. "I'm so happy to see you like this," he said softly. The three of us dined, savoring the dishes prepared by Helene. The atmosphere was relaxed and cheerful, so different from the tense dinners we were used to. At the end of the meal, Helene took my hands. "Amelie," she said, tears in her eyes, "I'd like to apologize again for the way I've treated you all these years. I was blinded by my prejudices and expectations. Now I see the wonderful woman you are, and I'm proud to have you as my daughter-in-law." I felt my heart swell with emotion. "Thank you, Helene," I replied. "It means a lot to me. And I'm glad we can finally get to know each other really well." The next few days were filled with preparations for my first restaurant cooking classes. I was nervous but excited at the prospect of sharing my passion with others. The big day finally arrived. When I entered the restaurant kitchen, I was greeted by an enthusiastic group of students, all eager to learn. Among them, I was surprised to recognize François, Marie, and Jean. "We didn't want to miss this," explained François with a wink. "The course went wonderfully well. I shared my knowledge, my tips, my culinary secrets." Seeing people's faces light up with understanding and pride when a dish succeeded was incredibly gratifying. At the end of the class, as everyone was tasting the prepared dishes, the owner of the restaurant approached me. "Amelie," he said enthusiastically, "that was fantastic. The feedback has been excellent. What would you say to making these classes a regular institution here?" I looked around, seeing the satisfied smiles on my students' faces, the pride in my family's eyes. I realized how much I'd missed this, sharing my passion, creating, teaching. "I'd love to," I replied with a big smile. That evening, as I drove home with Pierre, I reflected on everything that had happened in the last few days. The revelation of my past, which had frightened me so much, had in fact opened the door to a new chapter in my life. A chapter where I could be fully myself, where my passion could express itself freely, where I was finally accepted and appreciated by my family. "What are you thinking about?" asked Pierre, seeing me lost in thought. I smiled, clasping his hand in mine. "I think sometimes it takes an egg breaking for new life to hatch. And I'm so grateful for this new life." Pierre kissed me tenderly. "Me too, my love. Me too." As we drifted off to sleep that night, I realized that what had started as a disastrous evening had turned into a wonderful new beginning. I was Amélie Dubois, formerly known as Amélie Lefevre, and I was finally ready to fully embrace who I was, with the unconditional support of my family. The future looked as rich and tasty as the dishes I was about to create, and I couldn't wait to see what life had in store for me.